I'd like to give you a little bit of a presentation. I'm going to do several things. One is to basically explain to you what NAMPOA is. That's our industry association for oil and gas operators. I'll give you a little bit of the history of oil and gas exploration in Namibia. And finally, since it's a university, I thought this was a great opportunity to give a little oil and gas 101 lecture. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we actually do when we're exploring and developing and producing oil and gas. So NAMPOA, as I mentioned, is an association of oil and gas operators in Namibia. Our role is really to act as an interface between the governments and society in general in the industry. Currently, we have, I'm a bit too far away. Should I just hold it up? Apologies for that. Currently, we have 12 members as part of the association. Next slide. So Namibia has a long exploration history. It started back in the 1967 when the first well was drilled there. In 1974, Kudu was discovered. That's the gas field down in the Orange Basin. There was a bit of hiatus after that for drilling, but since independence, there have been 21 exploration wells drilled up until the end of 2020. Important point to make here is that every one of those wells was not commercially successful. Now, this isn't particularly unusual. If you think to other jurisdictions in the world, in Norway, back in the 1960s, 34 wells were drilled before they found their first discovery. That was the Ekofisk field. Even the Western Canada Basin, back in the 1940s, Imperial Oil drilled 133 exploration wells before the first oil was discovered there at Leduc. So it's not unusual to have this lack of success when you're first coming into a frontier basin. Certainly, the foreign investors have invested over $30 billion since independence to drill these wells. Next slide. And certainly, interest in Namibia has increased over the past 2 decades. There were only 2 exploration licenses back in 2004. And as of last year, there were 33 exploration licenses, both offshore and onshore. So interest has been increasing over this period of time. NAMCOR has 10% carried interest in almost all of these licenses. Some of these licenses, they actually have 15% equity. We've all heard about the recent discoveries. Certainly 2021 and 2022 were very active years for our industry and very exciting times. The Kudu field is the only gas discovery to date, and they currently have plans for a gas-to-power development. We've all heard about the discoveries of Shell and Total. Certainly that's very exciting, and they have plans to appraise both of those discoveries later this year to help them determine whether or not they're commercial enough to produce. And certainly Recon Africa just recently spud a multi-well exploration program up in northern Namibia. So we're very much looking forward to seeing positive results from that as well. Next slide. So here's my Geology 101 lecture, or Oil and Gas 101 lecture. I'll try to be brief and not pedantic about it. What do we look for? Really what we're trying to do as geoscientists and engineers is try to understand what is down below the surface of the earth, either below the land or below the seafloor. Oil is generated deep below the surface of the earth, and it gets trapped in little pockets. So what we're trying to do as explorationists is figure out where those traps are, if we have adequate seal to hold the fluids, if it's oil, if it's gas, if it's water, if it's good reservoir rock so that we can produce out of it. The important thing is that this is not easy. It's very technical, very complex, and it's well known that 8 out of 10 exploration ventures fail. So it's not for the faint of heart to go into this. You're more likely to fail than you are to succeed. So the first step in exploration typically is to go out and shoot seismic. Seismic is just essentially sending out pulses of sound, and you measure the time it takes back as it hits the different strata or layers of rock underneath the ground. You then take all of that data and put it through very complex computing algorithms and process it to create what we call our seismic sections. Then our geoscientists interpret that seismic. And again, they're looking for these things like traps and whether there might be hydrocarbons present. Seismic survey can take 2 to 6 months to complete, and the processing of that data can take anywhere from 6 months to well over a year. So it does take quite a bit of time. Next slide. Next slide. So you've collected your seismic, you've interpreted it, you think you found something that might be prospective to drill. So you go out and you prepare to do an exploration well. Key thing is the only way to know whether or not you have oil and gas is you have to drill a well. That's the only way you can figure that out. And it's also important to know that it's seldom the first well that you drill that tells you whether you have something economic to produce. The first well will tell you whether you have oil or gas, but you often need to drill further wells in order to be able to tell whether it's economic or not. So there's many different types of wells. There's the exploration wells that you're trying to discover if you have hydrocarbons there. There's appraisal wells. Appraisal wells can help tell you how much hydrocarbon is there, how long it might produce, and whether or not it's economic to produce. And then the production wells are once you've decided you're going to develop the resource, these are the wells that actually produce the hydrocarbons. So, okay, so you've done your appraisal, you've figured out that, you can produce this field for 20, 40 years, you've got something economic to do, and then you can go ahead and make a decision to actually develop the resource. This is where the real significant dollars come in. The oil and gas industry is capital intensive on a scale like no other industry. Some of the discoveries down in the Orange Basin could take upwards of $150 to $200 billion for that one development. So it's not for the faint of heart to get into this. And then, so you're really at the final stage, you've done your development, you've invested in all your facilities, got them up and running, and then you can actually start creating revenue. Fields typically last 20 to 40 years, so that's kind of the timeline of the revenue that you might expect to receive. So we talk about something called the petroleum or the upstream petroleum life cycle, and that really is what I've just described. You have your exploration drilling, you do your appraisal drilling, you decide to invest in a development, and then you come to production. A couple of key points to make about this. One is that it takes a long time to do this. It's a very complex and highly technical industry. It can take 7 to 10 years from when you actually first started exploring until when you might actually have revenue. Second point, it's very high cost, very capital intensive. There are very few industries in the world that have this level of capital intensity that's necessary. And the third thing is it's very high risk. You are more likely to have billions of dollars and at the end of the day walk away without a penny to show for it. This just kind of building or amplifying on that particular point, This is the cumulative cash flow, so it shows both the time and the expenditure profile that you have for any exploration and development project. What you can see is you have a long period at the beginning of exploration where you're shooting seismic and you're drilling wells. You then discover something, you become much more intensive in terms of the appraisal drilling and maybe collecting additional data. And then when you make the investment decision for development, that's when your serious cash flow, you're spending significant amounts of money at that point in time. And so you will go for years spending money before you actually start to produce and creating revenue out of this. Next slide. The minister gave us a very good discussion on the benefits to Namibia from this. The petroleum agreements that Namibia has set up ensures that they receive a fair share of the revenue in the forms of royalties and taxes. As the Honourable Minister mentioned, Namibia has been very clever in terms of also including a term called additional profits tax. You know, as he mentioned, you know, we're seeing on the news now about UK and United States complaining about the windfall profits that oil and gas companies are making. Namibia has been very clever in the way they've set up their fiscal systems, that they have ensured through this additional profits tax term that they get a proportionate share of that revenue. And in total, as the minister said, just reflecting on that, out of this, Namibia will get roughly 55 to 65% of the profits from any production that's seen. Go back, please. If you look at the cumulative cash flow chart on the lower right, this is an example, a typical example for an offshore development. And what you can see is for each curve, if you look at the oil company share, you can see where they're spending all of the money at the beginning of this, and then when you come to production is where they start making revenue. The government, however, has, they haven't had to invest in, they haven't had to spend $1 to get to this point. They haven't had to incur any of the risk associated with doing this activity, and yet they get the majority of the profit. So even though there's this comment about Namibia only having 10%, actually Namibia gets the lion's share of the revenue and the profit between both the government share and NAMPOA share. So just to sum up, you know, again, the oil and gas industry is really unique. It's unlike any other industry. It's unlike the mining industry. And again, it's because of the high risk involved, the capital intensity involved. And so it's very important for any government to have an enabling environment in order for the investments to succeed. And so this is where government policies are key, having regulatory environment that's consistent and well-known, having transparency, having fiscal stability. These are things that are all very important to investors and to allow them to continue investing in the country. So I'll leave it at that. Again, thank you very much. Look forward to the discussions later on, and thank you.